Okay, so this is the RadBoyz 1986 Kuwahara Scamp ET Tribute bike, the Zero Charisma bike. This is a detailed tour of the bike. I'm going to go over everything that we did to it throughout the rebuild, including all the original parts, everything that was customized, and anything that was added to the bike. Everything is air correct. All these parts you could have bought in 1986 and put on this bike, minus the custom bits such as the number plate and pad set. Every other part on this bike was available. So, and not that's not to say that these weren't available. There was these are replicas of ones that existed in the 80s. So if someone had the know-how or the contacts, they could have had these made themselves. So I would call this whole bike air correct, sure, even though it has custom parts. So what is original? Actually, no, I'm going to start with what is not original on the bike. So the parts on this that aren't original include the tires. They came from porkchopbmx.com. The seat, the tires and seat are both reproductions along with the grips, and they all came from porkchopbmx.com. The brake lines also came from Pork Chop, and they're not obviously reproductions because they're just standard brake lines, but they're the same as what you could have bought in the 80s. So those are the only pieces that are not original to the bike. The other things that aren't original are the chain is not original. That is an upgrade piece. The rotor's not original. That's an upgrade piece. Obviously the pad set and number plate are not original, and that's pretty much it. Oh, I added the pedals also. It had black resin pedals. I think they're, I have no clue. They might have been Welgos, but they were nothing special, so I added these aluminum platforms. So yeah, again, as for parts that are not original, it's the tires, the seat, the grips, the pad and number plate, the rotor, the brake lines, and the pedals. Those are the only parts that are not original on this bike. Everything else, the seat post clamp, the frame, stem, forks, bars, brakes, crank, chain wheel, every other part on this bike. Levers, rim set, it's original. Everything's original. So when this bike came to me, it was in really rough condition. Totally covered in rust pretty much. Everything was faded and sun-baked. Pretty much roached and needed full restoration. It was not in good survivor condition. I wasn't about to put this in my lineup and take it out and ride it at any point in the condition that it was in. So it was definitely in need of restoration, and I tore it down, and I thought about doing it original with black tires, black grips, and a red Kuwahara seat. But it was just too plain Jane, so I had to dress this thing up. It needed new decals. Obviously all the decals were roached, so it needed new decals. These are also reproductions, but again, identical to what came on the bike. So there is a bit of a list there of stuff that's not original to the bike. You know, it's almost too much to remember in a way, because let's run through it again. The pedals, the tires, the chain, the decal set, the seat, the grips, the number plate, and the pad set. None of those are original, but they are air correct and could have been put on this bike in 1986. Every one of those parts was available in 1986. So what I customized that was original is, one, when I rebuilt the rims, I painted the spokes. So the original color of the rims, I'm pretty sure, was this burgundy, dark red. Kuwahara, it's a Kuwahara color, so I painted the spokes to match because I wanted it to be a little bit flashier. I also painted the calipers and the levers to match that same color. I painted the pedals to match. I painted the chain wheel, I painted seat post clamp, all to match, and I also painted the stem, which again, originally that's the color it was. So it's the same as it was. I modified the stem into a fully functioning freestyle stem. And if you ask me, all of those things should have been done from the factory. I mean, maybe not as a base model, but it could have offered, an expert or pro version of the bike that had all these features. And that's a bit of my theory when I build bikes, is I try to build them in a way that they look like they could have came that way from the factory. Number one being they're air correct, and second of all, I try to do it in a manner that, you know, first of all, the bike is complete. I don't skimp out on, you know, decals or pad sets, or have half of the bike have nice new shiny parts and then, you know, leave a few that look rough and used. There's really no point on doing that. I mean, if you're going to do the work to restore a bike, you might as well go all the way and get it done 100%. This bike is now better than new. That is for sure. I mean, if they had to line this up in any bike shop back in 1986, the kids would have been jumping all over this bike. I know I would have. It's got everything. It's got all the features that you would look for. It's got amazing geometry. It's got a killer stance. Like, look at the stance on that bike. It's a fully functioning freestyle bike. I threw some finger pegs, NOS finger pegs. So these are NOS parts that I put on it that were NOS. The finger pegs were NOS. The rotor's NOS. I think that's pretty much it that was NOS. The everything else that I put on it is reproduction. So the grips are reproduction, seat is reproduction, the tires are reproduction. The Diacomp pad set, which is actually identical to what was on the bike original, they're reproductions from Pork Chop. I guess my pad set and number plate, that's custom by me. So the other thing that's custom is the stationary cup, which is actually the bottom cup for a gyro and not a rotor. I modified it. You can see this side has been cut off, and I basically, you know, I cut the one side off so it's one-sided, and now it works as a stationary cup for my rotor. And it actually is a nice piece because it dresses up the front a little bit more, adds a little more color. Again, I painted that to match everything else. I also painted the brake pad. I don't even know what you would call those. Holster? Yeah, I painted those anyways because I wanted pink pads and I didn't have time to order them and wait. So I thought, you know what? I'm just going to paint those. So I airbrushed those. I also airbrushed the dice and painted the pips, or whatever they call those things, the same dark red as everything else. And then anything that had stamping in it, such as the calipers, the levers, the seat post clamp, raised lettering here on the pedals, and stamping in the frame there and right here above the caliper. I detailed that all with a single bristle paintbrush. I also pinstriped that rotor right there. So basically I dressed this thing up, pulled out all the stops, cut no corners, did everything I possibly could to make this basically the best scamp on the planet. And I think I've succeeded because I've looked at a lot of scamps and I've never seen one that looked like this. Another feature is the upside down seat guts. So the seat guts, yeah, they kind of, that's one of my pet peeves, the seat guts. The worst thing that you can do with the seat guts is put them on backwards. When the seat guts are here in front of the post, that is wrong. You got to think of the bike as being anatomically correct. So the nuts are always behind the shaft. The nuts are behind the shaft. That's the rule of thumb I go with. The nuts are behind the shaft. You could just imagine sitting on this, your nuts would be hanging right there. Shaft. Nuts, shaft. Nuts, shaft. That's the proper way. The other thing is the way you mount the seat guts. On a Dominator especially, and a lot of other seats too, Dominators have low rails. You can see here, there's the rail. That's a pretty low rail. And in my opinion, seat guts are not a feature of the bike. So look at today's Pivotal seats. Like, they have no guts. It's nice, clean, you know, no ugly shit there in the way. So yeah, as I was saying about the seat guts. So like Dominators have low rails, and if this seat guts, if I had these mounted in the traditional fashion, all you'd see is a big, ugly looking, massive steel here with a nut, and that is not a feature of the bike that I'm intending on showing off. So a while back, I started mounting mine upside down. Takes a little bit of work. Sometimes you gotta flip like the left and right sides. Some seat guts have like, they're angled, and in those types you have to flip the left and right sides, have to be flipped in order to mount it upside down. This one I didn't have to do that because it's not on an angle, it's just basically square, so I just flipped it upside down. And Dominators are kind of nice because there's lots of room underneath there, so it's not that hard to get them in. A little bit of playing around, but I've successfully been able to do it on pretty much every seat I own, and you can't see the guts on any of my bikes. It's a nice clean look. Look at that. That is the way it should be. No guts. You don't need to see those. So yeah, I mean, that's another important thing when it comes to building or restoring a bike, in my opinion. One is air correct. So like, you know, using proper tires with skin walls. The skin walls make all the difference. That little tiny line of tan, for some reason, I don't know what it is about it, but for some reason, totally changes the look of a set of wheels. So in my opinion, air correct parts in general, the whole build needs to be air correct. It needs to be stuff that you could actually have bought within, you know, a few years of that bike being manufactured, and built this bike in the actual back in the day, right? The other thing is building your bike clean. Going the extra mile to make sure every part has been restored, you know, and every part is done proper. Little touches like the seat guts mounted upside down. Little touches like that make the difference. The other thing is brake lines. Sloppy brake lines. That's another one of my pet peeves. I don't know why it's so hard to route your lines in a sensible manner and cut them to length. I can understand when you're, you know, building a bike that is not a freestyle bike, has no rotor. Sometimes you got to leave a little extra line, that way the bars can drop from side to side without causing the brakes to pinch. But even in that case, you know, a lot of times guys have way too much brake line hanging way out here, or not crossed proper. You know, your lines can cross with a little zip tie in there to hold them nicely. This look right here, this is another reason why I like using rotors on my bike, because look at, there's like no brake lines showing there. Very nice clean look right there. It's actually decorative, you know, very little brake line showing there to the rear. And again, decorative. And then right here on the front, bottom portion of the front line. And like, that's clean. That's the way it should be. The biggest thing I gotta say when it comes to building a bike is proper planning, really thinking through every move, every part, how you're gonna go about restoring that part to brand new or better than new condition. It's the thinking and planning that's the important thing. You know, coordinating a build is very important too. You know, like what you choose for your colors and how you put those colors together on the bike really affects the end product. Anyways, this bike turned out beautiful, and that's because I applied all those things that I just talked about. So if you want a bike like this, that's a wrap for the first official RadBoyz old school BMX build. Many more to come. Tune in, like, subscribe.